Got my plans all printed, my cut list made. I'll be making this out of just over 3/4 inch black walnut. That is some nice wood that we planed on both sides, and I jointed on the table saw using a jointing jig. These two pieces will form the top and the bottom. I'll get the 1/2 inch trim on all the sides from these two pieces, and then the sides cut out of this monster board. That is nice. Let's get cutting. I started at the table saw by cutting the two long side pieces to length. They were already the right width from a previous project, which you'll see later on, hint hint. Once those were the right length, I took that large chunk of walnut and ripped that down to the right width for the top and bottom pieces. And then I ripped the inside border pieces to the right width. Earlier I said they were 1/2 inch, but actually they were 3/4 inch. I thought that looked better and it was much easier to work with too. And then I tried to use this small block plane to clean up the surface, which did not work at all. I guess maybe I didn't set the plane up correctly, but either way I said screw it and just decided to use sandpaper instead to clean up the surface and get rid of the gouge marks that plane left. Then I used black CA glue, aka super glue, with some accelerator to fill the knots and wormholes. There weren't too many on these pieces, which was good, but then I followed that up with a sharp chisel and then some sandpaper to flatten it all out. And this was my first time doing this, and I thought it worked very well. Then I got out my router table, clamped that in place, set up my fence to the depth of cut that I wanted, hooked up my dust collection, which is just a battery-powered shop vac, and was about to start routing when I noticed my homemade air filter looked a little clogged. So I popped out the old filter and installed a new one. This is just a box fan inside an MDF box with a 20-inch furnace filter, so now I can breathe clean air in the shop again. Then I made a few test cuts on the router with a scrap piece of wood, adjusted the fence to get the cutting depth where I wanted it, and then I just started routing. I sent all of the side pieces through, putting a chamfer on all 4 edges of the front face, and it worked pretty well. I made this table a few months ago just because I wanted a random project, and it paid off here. Here you can see what the edge looks like. Well, I was mid-cut and my router died on me. I saw some sparks fly down into this, and it won't power on anymore. It's warm, but it's not hot, so I guess I gotta get a new router. Went to Menards, got a new router, but as I was reading the manual and looking at the package, I saw that these things were in there, didn't know what they were. Apparently they're carbon brushes, and I guess you need to replace them. So I'm gonna pop this open and see what these carbon brushes look like. So I popped out these mysterious brushes, and lo and behold, well, this is all that was left. It's a chunk of carbon here. So my guess is if I replace the carbon brushes, this guy will work again. So I guess maybe I didn't need to buy this after all. And I guess inadvertently, this is a prime example of why you should always read the manual. Well, let's fire it up and see. Alright, well, now I have 2 routers. Then I laid all the parts out to see how they would look, and cut the inside border pieces to length, and then chamfered those edges. Then I gave everything a good sanding with 150 grit sandpaper using the random orbital sander and then a hand block. I found only 150 grit seems to work well with the hard wax oil finish I'll be using. And then I water popped everything. This raises the grain, so once the surface dries, you give it another quick sanding for a super smooth finish. Got everything sanded, now time to join these with dowels, just to keep things straight as I glue them. So 2 dowels here, corresponding holes here. This is a pretty cool trick I picked up from a John Heiss video. You put the non-sticky side of painter's tape on one side of the joint, use an awl to mark the holes, and then put the joint together exactly like you want, transferring the tape to that other piece, and then mark the corresponding holes there to, in theory, align the holes perfectly. Then I drilled one side on the drill press, and since the other side is vertical and won't fit on the drill press, I had to use a hand drill and eyeball the whole square, and it worked surprisingly well. Then I test fit the joint using some undersized dowels just to see how it would look, and boom, it worked. It looked great. Then I decided to glue on the inside border pieces now while everything was still manageable on my workbench and in multiple pieces, so I applied some glue and a bunch of clamps and waited. After about an hour or so, I removed all the clamps and cleaned up some of the glue squeeze out with a chisel. Then I could go back to the floor and mark and cut the top and bottom inside border pieces, going back and forth to the table saw to sneak up on that cut for a nice fit. One of them ended up not being as tight as I would have liked, but it still worked out okay. Then I added the chamfer to both of those edges and finished up with some hand sanding. And now time for full assembly. So I glued in the dowels, applied glue to the rest of the joints, and then for some reason I thought a strap clamp would apply enough force to close the joints, but nope. So I had to scramble and grab the longest clamps I own and try to force the joint closed before the glue set. It ended up closing, but in my panic I did not move the camera, so hence this awesome shot here. And I only had one long pipe clamp, so then I had to couple two normal smaller clamps together, but in the end it worked.
Whew. Well, that was stressful, but it's glued and clamped.
After the glue fully dried, I removed the clamps and cleaned up some of the squeeze out with that same trusty chisel before gluing on the top and bottom inside border pieces. I clamped the frame to my bench, applied glue, and clamped it tight, and once again waited.
So now the assembly is all complete. I will let the glue dry overnight and then put some finish on tomorrow.
The next day I got my area all prepped, got the surfaces clean, and ready for finish.
So for the finish I'm using Osmo Polyx Oil, Poly X oil. It is a hard wax oil in clear satin finish. You apply it with some non-scratching Scotch-Brite, let it sit for just a second, and then wipe it off with a microfiber cloth. And then 8 to 10 hours later, you do that one more time, and then after 24 hours or so, it's fully cured.
So like I said, I apply the Osmo with some Scotch-Brite, pretty much just wipe it on, wipe it off, it's that easy. I used to dread finishing wood until I discovered this stuff. I think it looks amazing. Walnut goes from this washed out brown to this deep saturated umber, and I just love it. I also finished an oak zero clearance table saw insert here too.
So now that the Osmo is fully cured on this frame, I need a mirror for it, and that's where this guy comes in. This was hanging originally in the guest bath, and you can see it's old and kind of gross, which is what inspired this whole project to begin with. But in this bathroom, you'll see a frame that looks just like the one I made. And actually, this one was made first. I learned a lot from this and then made this one and decided to film this one. So my plan now is to take this old mirror and cut it, the glass, to fit inside this frame. Let's try it.
I started by disassembling the old mirror, being careful not to break it. I'm foreshadowing here. Then I briefly cleaned it before attempting to cut it using a kit I borrowed from my dad. So you score the surface and then tap the bottom to propagate that crack further, and then drop it to hopefully break it along that line.
Well, it's not the cleanest edge, and a crack did propagate up slightly, but I think I can hide this inside the frame, but we'll see.
Then I cut the other side the same way as the first using my newly acquired glass cutting skills and was slightly more successful. Only slightly.
Well, I tried to put it in the frame and it was a little bit too long, so I brought it out here and tried to cut just the sliver off, and I cracked it.
So I ordered a custom-sized mirror that I knew would fit inside the frame, and if I'd measured correctly, no, actually I did measure correctly, just when I cut the glass, the jagged edge was outside the tolerance and then it wouldn't fit, and then I tried to cut the jagged edge off and then it broke. Anyway, I took the frame inside and installed the hanging hardware, and then to secure the mirror inside the frame, I used that same hardware on all four edges with some wooden wedges to lock it in place. Then I added some felt padding to protect the wall, and there it is, all complete. The final step is, of course, to hang it, so I removed the old mirror, made a small plywood bracket because the wall studs weren't where I needed them, and then I could finally hang it, center it, and admire it from a distance. Here are some close-up glamour shots of it in place in the bathroom. You can see some smudges on the mirror, that's great. My reflected painting there, and then, of course, the nice walnut wood grain. And you can also see me right there.